All right, so I'm going to get started, and some people will continue joining us, I believe. So welcome. This is PDW at Work, and PDW stands for Professional and Digital Writing at Work. And we're going to have a panel discussion today with Jason Carabelli and Janae Green, they're here with us. You can see them. So hi, guys. As I mentioned, our social media accounts for Writing and Rhetoric are up here on the slide. If you're active on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, we would love to talk with you there, and you can see announcements from the Writing and Rhetoric department. Our major is the PDW major, and our minor is the Writing minor. If you're interested in those, especially after hearing these folks talk today about the program a little bit, you can check out our website, which is www.oakland.edu/WRT, and there's information there about our major and our minor and our programs. All right, I did want to make this announcement as well. We will be hosting an awesome bonfire next Monday evening at 7 p.m. And this is for anyone interested in Writing and Rhetoric. So our PDW majors, our Writing minors, our EWSs, which EWSs are embedded writing specialists who work for the department, and anyone else that's interested in coming and hanging out with folks that love writing and rhetoric. So please come next Monday night at 7, and it's at the Fire Pit on OU's campus. It'll be a really fun time. All right, so now let me say that we're going to hear from our two speakers today, who are both alumni from the Writing and Rhetoric department at OU. And we hope that you brought questions for them, and we'll have lots of questions that come up as you hear them speak about their jobs and how they use writing in their jobs. So if you have a question, you are welcome to use the chat and put your question in the chat while they're speaking. And then we will address those questions after they each talk for a few minutes. Or if you want to just make a note of your question when we get to the end of their talks, we will have some time for people to either put it in the chat then or unmute themselves. So I just wanted to say that feel free to use the chat function as we go here. So let me introduce Jason Carabelli. He is a senior marketing content strategist at Red Hat Software, and he graduated from Oakland University in 2011. And we also have today Janae Green, who is the communications director at Epic Health, and she graduated from OU in 2012. So we'll hear from Jason first, and then we'll hear from Janae after that. So Jason, take it away. We'd love to hear from you.
Thanks so much. Hey, everybody. As Crystal mentioned, I graduated from Oakland University in the Writing and Rhetoric program in 2011. And I'm really looking forward to questions you might have about viable career options for people in the major. And what I thought maybe I would start with is just a little bit about how I ended up in the career path that I'm in, and then like a little bit about what that job entails on like a day-to-day basis. When I was an undergraduate student, my intention at the time always had been to become a college professor, just like many of your professors in your program now. And so in line with that, after I graduated from Oakland, I went and got a master's degree from the University of South Florida. And then after that, moved on, as you do, to a PhD program. And pretty quickly into that program, I started to realize that I don't know if an academic career path is really the thing that I'm looking for. And so every semester I sort of told myself, give it one more semester and maybe you'll feel a little differently. And after 2 years, I was sort of feeling the same way. And so I had to make a really scary decision. And I left my PhD program and then was left with, what do I do next? And so this was something that I had really never had to consider before. And I had to take a long, hard, and very objective look for the first time at what kinds of skills and experience had I developed as a student of professional writing and rhetoric that I could map onto some kind of a career path. Because up until then, I'd really been thinking, oh, I'm going to become a college professor, so I know exactly what I have to do to get there. And so one of the, to be honest, I spent a couple of years kind of just meandering, like was a construction worker, I worked at a coffee shop. And then when I decided, okay, I think I'd like to get back into the professional world, I thought, what sort of separates me? Like, what sort of skills have I developed? And I realized that certainly as a student of writing and rhetoric, professional writing, I had developed skills as a high quality writer. But also I thought that's not the only thing that I have going for me. For instance, I was not in a creative writing program. I was not in, a literature program where I was studying like ways to better understand or come to a better appreciation of creative text or literary text. And I started thinking about what what this offered me, what my degree path had offered me. And in addition to writing ability, being a skilled writer and understanding everything from grammar on up through like making meaning with different kinds of texts in different contexts, I realized that I had skill that I had developed in our program for coming up with a framework to evaluate the effectiveness of writing and communication in lots of different contexts and in lots of different mediums. And so I knew I needed some kind of a stepping stone job. And so if you're looking for a little bit of advice for like first job out of college, I found a job as some of you with academic backgrounds will know what the electronic thesis and dissertation program is at universities, which is when you get a master's or a PhD and you have to submit your thesis or dissertation to be published to an online repository. There's always an editor at the university that does that. And I said, I know what that is because I got a master's. I had to write a thesis and put it in the repository. And I said, that job has editor in the title, and that sounds like a great stepping stone job for somebody with writing ability. And so I will do that for maybe a couple of years and then see where I can go from there. And so I did that for about 8 months and then found a job at Red Hat as a content strategist. So content strategy, I'll be honest with you, I'm not even sure that degree path or that career path, content strategy, even existed when I was a student and when I graduated in 2011. That's a pretty new sounding job title. And it can mean a lot of different things at a lot of different companies. For some content strategists, the content part is really heavy. And when I first started as a content strategist, most of what I was doing was writing long form article content. So that for the web, long form means like 1,000 to 1,500 words roughly, which probably doesn't sound that long to some of you, but that's sort of like long for the web. For other content strategists, and this is a little bit more like what my job is like now, it's more on the strategy side. And so what that means is not just writing content, but figuring out what kind of content we should create, and what, should it be an article? Should we have social media posts about this thing? Should it be an interactive piece of content? Should it be a video? And how do we make those determinations? And then also, once we do decide what we're going to create and what it's going to say, how do we promote it? How do we get it in front of the right people? What's the right channels to get this in front of the people that we want to get in front of? I work in a marketing context. That means that mostly the content I'm trying to come up with, in a certain sense, is trying to support a sales team. I want to help to show people about Red Hat's products and how they're valuable, and then also hopefully get some of them to start to move into what we call a sales funnel, where we have contact information about them, and if we know enough about them, eventually they may start to get like newsletter emails, etc., or different kinds of communication. And so, like I said, like when I first started, my job was mostly writing focused. I'm happy to dig into that a little bit more in the questions if you'd like what kind of writing I do. And today, now my job's a little bit more on the strategy side of things, figuring out like lots of different kinds of content that we should create, how we want to promote it, where we want to promote it, what kinds of things it should be. And so I thought maybe just like a quick day in the life, kind of like what's a project look like for a content strategist for me. Because I work for a enterprise software company, it's a little bit, so like you may be familiar with like Apple. That's a software company that makes software and computers for people like you and I to use in our daily lives. You may be on an Apple laptop right now. Red Hat is an enterprise software company, and there are a lot of enterprise or B2B, business to business companies that make solutions for other companies to use. So Red Hat makes software for other companies to use to build their own software. And many of these companies need content strategists. That's where a lot of content strategy jobs are. And so in order for someone to even at a company to even realize that they might want to use go with a Red Hat product, a Red Hat software solution, they might be first just in a kind of educational phase where they're trying to figure out new ways of building software at their company or new ways of doing business. And anytime anyone is in that kind of an educational phase, all of us do the same sort of thing. We go to Google and we're trying to Google things, keywords that we've heard before, like, what is this thing? And so these companies might be researching different keywords for new ways of building software, terms that the context doesn't really matter here. Things like microservices. What are microservices? Somebody at the company might be going, I keep hearing this. What is this thing? Part of my job is figuring out what those keywords are that are related to searches people might do who may one day be customers for Red Hat. So I identify those keywords. I might work with people in the business to say, like, what do you think people are searching for? And then I use software. It's called SEO software, which is a term you may have heard of, search engine optimization software, to figure out, are people really searching for this? How many people a month are searching for these words? And let me find all the words that we want to get our content to show up in Google for. And so then I come up with a content strategy, and I say, I think we should create educational articles, sort of like textbook chapters about what are microservices or what are Linux containers, what is Linux, and create long form content like 1,000 to 1,500 word articles that just gives a great answer to what is that question. I do some back end technical work to make sure that that content has the right HTML to rank in Google for that keyword. And in many cases, I write the content myself. And then we publish, I will build that content in our, with HTML and CSS on our website, put it on our website. And then hopefully if we've done our job right, eventually that'll start ranking in Google. When people search, what are microservices? They'll see an article from Red Hat. So they have a really positive experience with our company, our brand. And then they may also, click on a link from there. If I say like, oh, here's a more technical guide to this thing. And they may give us something in exchange for that next level piece of content. I may say in a form, we need your, give us your name and email, and we'll give you this great, white paper or ebook that's really high value that you want because you got a great free article from us that you found on the web. Try this. And that is sort of like that's called a conversion in marketing. And that means somebody's converted, they've given us something in exchange for what we gave them. And so then from there, I got to figure out how to promote that article in different ways, like social media. I then have to try to report on that article with our stakeholders, because you're always collaborating with lots of people in a big business if you work for big corporations. So I want to show them like, hey, we got X number of conversions or X number of people came to this article from search. And then one of the last things I always do is that we continuously optimize content, meaning we rewrite it, redraft it, try to find ways to tweak it. And that's like a one example of a project that a content strategist might work on. So I'm happy to jump into any more of that in the questions, or if you have any kind of questions at all, but I'll leave it there. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jason, so much. All right, let's move to Janae Green. We'd love to hear from you about your job and the writing you do on your job.
Sure. Thank you, Crystal, and thanks, Jason. It was very insightful. It's been interesting to learn about your path and stuff like that, because I do remember, hearing about who you are, during my time at Oakland, but it's weird to cross paths now so much later. But anyway, my path outside of Oakland was much different. I never imagined ever going to like a academic level with things. I actually had been working as an office manager through most of undergrad for a physical therapy company, and needed to do an internship because there was no way in heck I was going to write a thesis. So I asked them to give me an internship, and they agreed, which led to me writing, in a way, technical writing for the physical therapy company as a whole. So taking complex journal articles and then kind of transposing them to the layperson so that they could be easily understood and then used as an education piece, and then also a marketing tool. After about 1.5 years of that, I realized that I was really bored and lonely sitting in an office and just writing by myself all the time. So I kind of decided to go back to the route of office manager and ended up managing a behavioral health outpatient treatment center for severely mentally ill adults, but not exactly related to writing. I did help with a lot of writing around like their grant funding and securing that. So while I was there, I secured multiple like $1 million grants and stuff like that to help them expand their services. So put my degree to use, even though it wasn't necessarily my role. So I guess that's kind of been the theme for my entire career trajectory, has just been creating opportunities to use my degree in creative ways. It's kind of one of those things where when you're interviewing, people will be like, oh, a writing degree, like what's that? How do you use it? And you have to sell yourself to them on like, well, it's kind of like a marketing degree, but with a lot more psychology to it. And I spend a lot more time analyzing my audience so that I can figure out what's going to be the best way to deliver the message to get them to do what I need or understand it in the way that I need them to understand. So analyzing your rhetorical situation and building a profile around who that person is. From there, you know, it really ignited a passion of mine for community health and making healthcare accessible to the people who are marginalized or underserved. I ended up working for a few years at a federally qualified health center. And while there, I continued to do their grant funding and annual reporting, and also had some really great opportunities to deliver speeches to large audiences about federally qualified health centers and the importance of accessible healthcare to, you know, state and federal bodies of lawmakers. So some really unique opportunities were presented there. But again, it was all about crafting speeches that would ignite passion for a group of people who are maybe pretty dispassionate about helping others. Additionally to that, I've written speeches for other people, and the way that I like to phrase it is I rode that writing degree until the wheels fell off. I'd gotten as far as I could with internal communications, external communications, speech writing, you know, being in community development and trying to make connections between our group and other, you know, community organizations out in the world, and kind of realized it was time for me to get an advanced degree. So I ended up getting an MBA. You know, I waited a few years before I started on that path, but it paid off. And I'm now currently working at Epic Health. I run our sales and marketing team, our internal communications for keeping our patients engaged and making sure that or our employees engaged and making sure that we are driving employee retention. And then I also run a few of our operational endeavors, which includes our call center and some other items that we have to help deliver high quality healthcare to the people who need it most. So we have a few offices in Detroit. So me as a suburban white person has to do a lot of work to kind of figure out what the people in my urban communities that we're serving need to hear. How do I need to train the call center so that they're answering the phone in a way that you know, that the patients will respond to? How do they phrase things? Are there certain words? How do they not react to people when they maybe don't know what their diagnosis is or what it means? So there's been a lot of opportunity, but a lot of it I've kind of had to create for myself. But luckily, the different skills that I picked up along the way in the writing program actually helped me kind of think critically and in an abstract way to make connections and drive them to concrete results.
Great, thank you so much. All right, Dr. Greg Giberson's here with me, as well as various other writing and rhetoric faculty. And so I think Dr. Giberson's gonna take it over here for the Q&A.
Yeah, we currently don't have any questions directly in the chat, but we have, I mean, there are about 44 people. So instead of sending you directly to the chat, although you're welcome to ask questions there, if anybody has anything that they want to ask right now, just go ahead and unmute and ask our panelists your question. Or I can start.
I wanted to ask Jason, so can you talk about, you know, what role, if any, sort of the concept of storytelling has to the work that you do?
Hey, Dr. Ostergaard, it's nice to see you. Yeah, so what I can say is that, to be honest, most of the content that I have been involved with is not as narrative focused as some of the other stuff, although there are plenty of people at Red Hat who are really sort of like telling Red Hat's story. We have, in fact, a program called Open Source Stories, kind of like almost like a magazine about things that people have done with open source software that have sort of like changed the world in lots of different ways. And some of my colleagues will write articles that really are a little bit more like story driven. But even when I am, even when I am kind of doing the very dry work of explaining like, what is this technology concept, or like, what's this new way of doing business? I still have to think about how do I engage a reader, and there's still some storytelling aspects to that. I have to sort of like put myself in the mind of the audience and think about what are they, especially like, okay, this is someone who's like at a laptop or maybe even on a phone who's just like scrolling and they clicked on an article and they're reading it, like where are they at? How do I kind of like carry them along and give them something to latch onto? And sometimes I will try to use examples of the real world application of a technology concept right in the beginning. Like imagine you're on Amazon shopping and you use the search bar to search for something. And that is something that then I can explain in terms of how that technology, that piece of technology in Amazon is related to something that might be generally relevant to the concept that I'm talking about. But it builds in a personal connection, and that's still storytelling. And so like, even in the kind of dry technical work, there for me is still, I'm still thinking about how to bring people along. I think that counts as storytelling.
That's great. Thank you.
I have a question. So would you say that your professional and digital writing classwork when you were in school translates to what you do for your job? Or did your job look different than you thought it would when you were working towards your degree, if that makes sense?
I have thoughts, but Janae, I'm happy if you want to take the floor. I'm curious what you have to say as well.
Well, I could tell you right now, I run like 6 different programs. I'm designing an ERP, which is something that's going to kind of combine like our electronic medical record with our CRM for like marketing campaigns and stuff like that. So I never in a million years thought my writing degree would get me to a point where I was designing softwares and working as an IT project manager, but here we are. So definitely not. I can see like where some of the grant writing projects and more straightforward stuff, I could have foreseen that a little bit, but a lot of the other stuff that I'm doing, I've just had to learn how to put on a lot of different hats along the way. And that's really led to a pretty robust career profile for me.
If I had to guess, I'd say probably most people in any degree program will tell you after they've had a couple jobs under their belt that they, for the most part, they kind of like learned their job on the job. But definitely, I still think through much of my coursework on a day-to-day basis. It's just that now the language that I use to talk about it and think through it is different than it was. So for instance, I was really interested as an undergraduate in rhetorical theory and studied what I'm sure many of you have studied: ethos, pathos, logos, kairos, the rhetorical triangle, Burke's parlor, that kind of stuff. This is still the way that I frame content and think through content, but I don't talk about it that way because that wouldn't necessarily match the context that I'm in now. But I can give you an example from the other day. I was working on a piece of content about a concept called zero trust, which doesn't really matter what it is. The US federal government is under executive mandate to move to a zero trust security model. So it's something we want to make sure people know Red Hat is in the business of. And I was working with a subject matter expert to create this content. So that means that's someone who really knows the technical side of what zero trust is. And then here I am, I'm the content strategist. So I'm helping them draft and also figuring out all of the extra content stuff. And I really want at a certain point in the article, I want in the first paragraph of the section to reference the person who created zero trust in an analyst piece from like 10 years ago. And my subject matter expert, who I think actually knows this person, was like, oh, I don't want to, that's a competitor. I don't want, this is our story on zero trust. I don't want to give any credibility to one of our competitors. And I convinced him I said, listen, we will show our audience that we understand the big picture conversation on this topic of zero trust by borrowing the credibility of the originator and showing our audience that we understand the full story of how this thing got started, right from that Gartner analyst piece in, what, 2010 or whatever, right up until what we have to say about it today. And what I was talking about was ethos and borrowed credibility, borrowing ethos from a source that has a credibility that you yourself do not have, but weaving that into your own credibility. But I didn't talk about ethos with that subject matter expert. I just translated the language of that coursework into my context today. And I think also I'll just say briefly that when it comes to looking for jobs and building your resume or your LinkedIn profile, which LinkedIn is a great way to, I see that as a platform to connect recruiters at companies with potential employees and recruits, and those recruiters are searching LinkedIn for keywords. It makes sense to take your your coursework and the language that's used in education to talk about that, and think about how to translate that to map up to job postings that you see online, and do that sort of translation work. So the basic skills, in answer to your question, I use all the time, but I think about them and talk about them in a little bit of a different context that just makes sense for content marketing.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I've heard from a lot of people across different careers and fields that their coursework creates a pretty good baseline for what they do for their jobs, but at the same time, you do end up doing so much on the job learning and sometimes head in such a different direction. So I'm always interested in seeing how. So thanks for the insight, both of you.
Yeah, that was great. We've got a question on the chat from Samantha. Samantha wants to know what style of writing you would say you use the most in your current job. And I want to add on to that because I had a similar question. And that is, could you talk about not just the style, but like the layers of writing that you do in your job? Like, you don't just do one type of writing, right? You write and you write about writing, and you write about revising, and there's probably all kinds of text floating around. So what style and kind of what are the layers like?
I can start with this one. I would say that I'm not necessarily a technical writer, and that is a different kind of career path, but much of the writing I do, because I work for a software company, is very technical. And so it's also, I think, very similar to newspaper writing and journalism in that, for one thing, the way that I structure content, I am just like a journalist. I'm trying to include the most important, relevant information at the top. And then at that, it gets sort of like less interest or less relevant or less necessary to understand a thing as it gets towards the bottom. Because my assumption is that most people reading this, or not, whatever I write, are not going to read the whole thing. And in fact, I can prove that they don't, because I have data analytics tools that show me that like people only made it about halfway down this article for the most part. So that also means that in terms of style, my goal is always to make things shorter and clearer and cut. And figure out, like, the puzzle game that I'm playing is always, how do I use the least number of puzzle pieces as possible to still create some kind of meaning? So I don't know how much of an answer that is to the style question, but I think that, like, it's sort of like journalistic in that it needs to be written in such a way that anyone with any level of expertise could understand it. And that's really important for the kind of search engine optimized content that is a really big part of my job, is that if you want to get your content to rank in Google, it needs to usually be written in such a way that lots of different people can get value out of it. And it doesn't require a lot of previous knowledge in terms of style again. When it comes to writing about like the layers of writing, this is just a me thing. I really don't care for PowerPoint presentations or what we call decks, but that is a huge part of the kind of internal promotional work that I have to do for the writing that I do and the strategies that I come up with. And that's like a whole other ball of wax that is nothing like the front-facing, sort of customer-facing content that I'm creating. And then there's also, of course, just like, trust me, if all of you who are students that like think about email writing, because most of my day is writing emails to people and having to think about how to present sometimes very critical ideas to people, especially now that we're all remote with much less in-person interaction. And so, yeah, that's a sort of long-winded and meandering answer to that question.
I thought it was a great answer, and it kind of piggybacks off of some of the work that I do. Part of the marketing and sales piece that we have is blog writing and making sure that we are optimizing that for SEO, and trying to figure out what those search terms are that people are going to, lead down the path to find your website. And sometimes it's really unexpected stuff. Like one of our best performing blogs of all time was about foods that lead to cloudy urine, which like doesn't seem like something that people are going to Google all that often, but apparently it does. Either that or no one else has written about it. But I also do a lot of other writing, and a lot of it comes down to the design elements that are going to play a role in the writing that we're doing. So a lot of the audience that we are targeting is reading at, a third grade level or below. So we have to make sure that graphically we're representing exactly what we're talking about. We're kind of leading people to the assumption that we need them to make. And then there's also elements of like just using the correct priming words. So people come into your practice and they see like high quality written on the wall, and they immediately assume that you are a high quality place of business, and they associate those words with you. So there's a lot of like almost neuro-linguistic processing that we use as part of the tools in the toolkit over here, but there's a lot of persuasive writing and technical writing, and even just really driving it home on the graphics or the color choice or the font choice, and really thinking through all of the elements of it to make sure that your audience understands.
Thank you. That was great. We got another question in the chat. Hannah wants to know what makes or made each of you so passionate about writing. Where does that passion for writing and engaging with audiences come from?
Well, I have always been fascinated by language and making meaning with language. And so that's a kind of answer to like why I've always loved writing. But when it comes to the writing that I do now and why I'm passionate about it, one of the things that's really unique about my current the writing I do in my career is that where once I may have been writing for a very small number of people and without a whole lot of sense of like objective or quantitative ways of understanding its effectiveness. One thing that's kind of really neat about the writing I do now is that I'm writing for sometimes hundreds of thousands of visitors and visitors to our website, readers, and I can see using data analytics tools, like exactly how they engage with this content. Like I can see where their mouse is moving on the screen. I can see how far they made it down the page. I can see what they're clicking on. And then I get to try to intuit from that this game of like, well, what does that mean? How do I change this to be better or different? Like, what can I do to optimize this content and my writing ability? How can I improve it based on these tools? And there's sort of like all these different instruments, like you're flying a plane now and you just have way more instruments than I used to have to fly the plane. And for me, I think maybe sometimes that might scare people a little bit, but I just think it's the neatest thing. I think it's so cool. And that's something that I'm just really passionate about right now.
Yeah, for sure. I think that a big part of it for me was that I'm definitely an overthinker. And so it kind of gives you an outlet to overthink every single possible element and then put it all together into like one complex package. So not only do you have to think about how what you're doing makes you feel or how it makes you think about something different, but you also have an opportunity to analyze how everyone else is going to perceive it and then put it out there in a way that drives the results that you want. So it kind of gave me a way to focus all of that anxiety and nervous energy into something really productive. And so it just kind of happened really naturally. In a way, I was pretty lucky to have stumbled upon this department because I definitely started in the School of Business. Like I wanted to be an accountant for whatever reason. Definitely not the field for me. So I got lucky to have found it, but
We've got another question in the chat. And what a nice compliment. I noticed that you both are very great speakers. Do you think writing has helped you with speaking in front of others? And I can relate to what might be behind that question. And that is, how do I get over my fear of speaking in front of people? So what role has studying writing and being a writer played in your ability to communicate as a speaker?
I'm still terrified to speak in front of Janae. Are you afraid to do that? I'm so scared to speak in front of people all the time.
You know, I I'm a little bit out of practice at this point. But you know, everything is so virtual now that there was a time in my career when everything was in person and I was really good at it and could just throw everything out there, but not so much now. But yeah, I don't know, it might have, but I feel like a lot of it just kind of came with exposure, and I'm doing it more and more often.
And I'll, to be honest, because I had always intended to be a professor as a graduate student, I did a lot of teaching. I taught a lot of composition courses, like first year writing courses, business writing, et cetera, and teaching and speaking in front of undergraduates was my real test of, like, that was where it was like trial by fire in terms of getting comfortable speaking in front of people. Sure, some of you can relate. And so more than anything, I think that's what I kind of try to rely on. And like Janae, I'm a little rusty at it at this point, but thank you. That's a very nice compliment that you made for both of us.
Jason, I can see the classroom instructor in you when you speak. I'm sure a lot of us can. I think it's great. Here's a great question, one that's probably an important one for a lot of students. What kind of prep work experiences can or should students seek out to better prepare them for entering the professional world? I think that's an anxiety that a lot of our students share. As Janae pointed out, this is more of a liberal arts degree, and so what can students do to better prepare themselves to enter the work?
So my advice is to find an industry and apply yourself to it. For me, that was healthcare. It was something that I really cared about a lot once I got into it, and actually tried to leave at one point and do something else and was immediately pulled back into it. So you can make a career out of anything. You just kind of have to forge your own path. And you have to get creative with the opportunities that are in front of you and look for ways to kind of expand what you're doing and grow from within where you are. It's one of those like bloom where you're planted scenarios, which everyone hates an adage like that, but it's really true. I took a job at like a front desk and then grew it into an internship, and then a marketing career path, and it's kind of blossomed from there. But it's because I was always looking for opportunities within an industry that I was really passionate about. So it was like a big driving force for me.
This question reminded me of, Janae, something you said in your opening remarks, which I've had the same experience. I don't think you said it exactly this way, but with our degree program, we have really in-demand skills. We truly do, but you got to hustle to make it make sense to people who are hiring managers at companies. And so it's different than, like, if you go to school for engineering, you take engineering classes, you're qualified to be an engineer, and people looking to hire engineers know that you have very specific skill sets that map to what they're looking for, because that's just a little bit more codified. And for us, and I kind of mentioned, you really have to think about what are the skills you developed, and then using language, how do you map those skills into an industry? Like Janae said, like, how do you take, like, for instance, I have been a writer my whole life, and I discovered that in marketing, that's called content. We call it content. And so, like, content is a word that, like, you take on the language of the discourse community that you are within, the industry that you're within. And that's a big deal in a practical way, again, when it comes to like LinkedIn, because LinkedIn is a way for recruiters to connect with potential recruits, employees. But also just in the way that you're sort of like framing yourself in an interview and trying to make your skills make sense to people, so that someone who's a busy hiring manager who's like has no idea what your degree career, your educational background means compared to all these other people, you're going to make it simple for them, and sort of they can understand, like, okay, yeah, that sounds like what we need, and then that you can kind of map it in that way. And then, like, just in like a real little note, if you are interested in the kind of career path that I'm in, which is content strategy, you've heard me mention a couple of times search engine optimization, or SEO, and Janae mentioned this as well. And this is a really big part of content marketing. It's not the kind of thing that you will really study in higher education, because it changes so often, but there are a lot of really like free, high quality online like guides and classes that you can take, and those kinds of certifications mean something if you're interested in going. I was fortunate enough to get a job in content strategy without knowing what content strategy was or what SEO was and learn those things on the job. But now SEO is a huge part of what I do. It's a great skill to map to writing ability. And then again, I mentioned like data analytics. You want to find ways, if you're interested in the sort of career path that like a content marketing path, don't be afraid of taking a data-driven approach to writing and being explicit about that and being able to demonstrate some skills or classes that you've taken in that regard. So those are things that I would say they're great to add on to your professional writing background.
Are there any questions from the floor right now? I've been kind of going straight to the chat, but does anybody in the room have questions they want to unmute and ask?
Hi, I just want to say hi to both Janae and Jason, who I had as students many, many years ago. Hi, it's so great to see you. I just want to highlight something, and I think it's probably related to this SEO thing, right? Is that you both used the idea of search terms, right? And keywords and coming up with those kinds of things. And I just want to point out that that is a large part of our library research-based program too, right? And that's often a skill that I think our students don't quite understand why it's important. So I'm really grateful to both of you for giving us these sort of real world examples of how that translates from just I'm writing a research paper for my class to this is a skill that is actually very current and relevant and applicable in real world career and business context. So thank you guys for that.
It's a huge part of my job, and most people that I work with really do consider it the sort of the current state and future of content marketing is search.
Just want to remind Jason that he actually was my research assistant back in about 2011 and created an amazing survey for my research. And so you're already kind of dabbling into that analytics, data analytics kind of thing back then, right?
I remember, and it's so good to see you, Dr. Allen. And and like definitely, like I've mentioned, the skills that I was starting to work through and figure out in my coursework, I never intended to apply them to a corporate job, an industry job, but they have been so applicable. And in many ways, it's just a matter of figuring out how to transfer them. And that's sort of the trick for students.
Exactly. I can remember one time when you were having some kind of trouble with the software program and you got on the phone and talked to somebody at the company and said, how do I do this? And I was so impressed with you as an undergraduate being able to do that. But those are the kinds of skills that you have obviously harnessed and created this opportunity for yourself. So great to see you.
Janae, did you want to add something? I saw you unmute or.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, learning about Boolean search changed my life and my ability to find the articles that I needed and then also like convert them into something that people could understand. So that was, I think we had one class during one course that we talked about it, and it kind of changed things for me. So.
Great. Kasha has a question, and I think that this is a really good one. She notes that we have a rather large English department in the university, and then we also have a writing and rhetoric department and program. And a lot of people, they confuse us with English still, even though we are a separate and distinct field. So her question is, what attracted you to WRT as opposed to English? What differentiated the two for you?
Now I can say this. No, this is not a great answer, but this is the truth. So I started at Macomb Community College, and I knew that I wanted to be a writer, and I didn't really know what that meant or how I was going to do that. And when I transferred to Oakland, I had to assign myself a major, and I saw, I'm looking at a list of majors and like some kind of orientation, and I see English. I'm like, okay, that sounds right. And then I remember at the very bottom of the list, somebody I think it's been like written in because it's a brand new major, writing and rhetoric, and it was in alphabetical order. So W is at the bottom. I said, well, writing. I don't know, that sounds better to me. And so I really, without a whole lot of understanding of the difference between those two things, I decided to sign up for writing and rhetoric. And I thought, oh, I'll change it if I don't like it. And I fell in love with it. And it was a great career path for me, and made more sense. And I think of the difference as, for me, I sort of mentioned in my opening remarks, it has provided me with a framework to evaluate the effectiveness of writing in a variety of different contexts. And now I talk about that in terms of strategy, because I got to map this onto my profession, my career path. And that I love strategy. I love strategy games. And that's just so much more exciting to me to think about writing that way. I love literature in my personal life, but it was just never anything that I wanted to study professionally. So I don't know, that's my answer. It was a very strange way that I ended up in our major, but it was sort of like fateful. It worked out great.
We'll take it. Janae?
Yeah. So I actually have an English Lit minor. So I guess like I didn't really differentiate all that much, but I will say that I was always someone who was kind of like a jack of all trades, master of none kind of person. And I kind of found a home in the writing department, you know, through whatever first course it was that I took, just purely from being able to use all of the skills that I was learning along the way from all of my other courses into one application. It was kind of like taking all of these inputs from all of these other areas, because you combine math and science and all of these other fields into kind of one conglomerate entity, and it doesn't really force you to choose a path. You can kind of make it your own.
Thank you. Are there other questions from those in Zoom? I have a question. Jason, you mentioned revision specifically, and Janae, you have implied it in several different ways. And as you know, revision and teaching revision and actually revising is something that weaves its way through all of the courses that we teach. And I think that kind of inspires some frustration for a lot of students, even though we try to emphasize how important revision is. How does revision actually play out for professional writers? Is there a lot of revision in the writing that you do?
I'll talk the rest of our time on this thing, so I'm going to be careful. There are different kinds of and stages of revision for me, and sometimes it is overwhelming. If I'm writing a piece of content, like a long form article that's going to appear in Search, or something that sort of demonstrates Red Hat's thought leadership on a particular topic, depending on how important that topic is to our business, I may have anywhere from 2 to like 20 different people with different backgrounds and different expertise who have oversight and edit access to my content. And so in that stage, revision is very much like a gauntlet. And I am trying to advocate for the thing that I have expertise in, while still respecting and utilizing the expertise of people with backgrounds in marketing, technology, et cetera, business, sales. Then we publish the thing. And then sometimes like that's when the fun starts with revision. Sometimes the revisions that I make are based on data, like quantitative data. And sometimes it's more qualitative data. Like for instance, sometimes I may look at what we call a heat map of content, and I'll see that a lot of people's mouses are hovering, or their screen is staying at a certain band of content for a really long time. And I have to decide, is that because that's really confusing and actually they're having a hard time getting through it? Or is it because this is something interesting and I have to try to, and then that's when your writer brain kicks in and you just have to rely on your expertise as a writer. Other times it's really quantitative and technical. It's just like technical SEO, where I will run a program that will crawl the HTML of every competitor article that appears for a particular keyword that I want my content to rank for. And I will look for all of the different words that they're using in their articles. And I will see, am I missing any concepts that I need to talk about in order to try to get this content a little bit higher up in search? Like, are they talking about things that I'm not talking about? And then revision is very much a technical process of like adding in new pieces of content based on what I see in our amongst like doing like a competitor analysis. And then like definitely sometimes I just sit down with a piece of content and I approach it from like a writer brain, like what, like, and when I read this now, maybe like a year after I wrote it, does it still are there parts that aren't quite clear, that don't make sense, and forget about the analytics tools, just like, like what kind of sensibility have I developed as a writer that can make this different? And like, to be honest, like I said, I could keep going on, so I'm gonna stop here, but revision is it's more than the actual initial drafting of content for me.
I can agree with some of that. For me, it's a little bit different because I'm kind of like the end decision maker when it comes to the content that gets pushed out. So I'm pretty fortunate to get to be the person who's like, nope, that's not going to work for me, or try again, or hey, yeah, that's great. But one book that actually kind of was a game changer for me was it's called Alchemy by Rory Sutherland. And if you've never picked it up, I strongly suggest it. Not that I'm like trying to like give any kind of marketing plug right now, but it really instigates using magic and creativity in the marketing and the writing that you're doing to challenge you to A/B test stuff. And that's a lot of what we do here at Epic, where we'll draft 2, 3, 4 different emails, different subject lines. We'll push it out to a small group, figure out which one performs the best, and then we'll go with that. And just we're constantly trying new things and tweaking new things. We're trying to grow our population of senior patients that we have in our offices, and we know that email and texting is probably not going to be the best way to reach them. So we're trying like 4 different types of letters, where like one is like a piece of paper that's folded differently, one is on like more like a more elite type of paper than others. So we're just constantly looking for ways to be creative and kind of challenge what you would normally see, and using that A/B testing. So revision can be a lot of different things, and sometimes it can just be experimentation, and it doesn't necessarily mean changing what you're doing. It means starting with different options and then making choices based on performance.
Thank you. I missed a question here from Joshua. He's curious what advice you might have for someone who wants to make a profession out of some, a very specific thing like writing stories for video games. If you have a specific goal in mind, do you have advice about how to go about maybe targeting that profession?
My advice would be to find whatever entry level job you can find in that particular career path and just go for it. While you're there, like once you're there, you'll be able to completely infiltrate the system and make it your own, but you got to get your foot in the door.
I don't have much to add to that, except that if you figure it out, let me know. And also, it might not be a bad idea to, even if you are interested in mostly the narrative aspects, learn some code. It's a technical field, and if like that may be changing a bit as there are more platforms that are a little bit more like low code or no code for game development, but like probably learning some code would be a valuable asset in an interview for that, especially if you want to try to get into that field, not necessarily in the job that you want, but in a stepping stone job that will get you to the job that you want. Code is probably the way to go.
We're kind of running out of time here. Are there any final questions for our panelists?
I'm going to make a plug for Lauren's question in the chat.
I can ask it out loud.
Thanks.
Okay, go ahead, Lauren.
So my question was, when applying and interviewing for a job, what are your best tips for marketing yourself and impressing a hiring manager?
So my best tips are to do your research. See if you can figure out who's going to be interviewing you, and see if you can learn a little bit about them and what's important to them. I know to get the job that I have now, I was able to do a little bit of research into the physician who is going to be interviewing me, and I was able to kind of get his background, and I could tailor my responses to generic interview questions that most people ask to what I knew would be important to him. And they weren't necessarily like, I don't know, they weren't necessarily false answers from my perspective. They were also answers that I would give, but it did kind of give me a chance to hit on certain things that I knew that he would value, like marginalized populations, data-driven healthcare, the importance of analytics and measuring outcomes. So it gave me some really great insight into what would be important to him, and then kind of could go from there.
I think that that pretty much matches my recommendations as well. And it's been a little while since I've been on a job interview, but I am now occasionally hiring people. And so I'm on the other side of it, which is really strange. And one of the things that I'm usually looking for is, are you able to demonstrate your thinking in an interview process? Can you show how you think through problem solving, and can you show that you've participated in problem solving? And so one of the things that's helpful there, especially if you don't have a ton of experiences, think about some very specific examples of things you've done that you're proud of, either in your educational context, like big projects, or if you have had 1 or 2 jobs, and then you're really own those stories. But then I think this is kind of related. Think about how to have the kind of the agility to apply those different stories to different questions that you're going to get asked. And so that's sort of like the examples and stories that you have are like the tools you're working with, and you just got to figure out how to make those tools work for the different questions you're being asked in a way that's still relevant to the person that's interviewing you. And also, I'll just say that when it comes to the kind of company that I work for, being able to show that you're good at collaborating is a big deal, because it's very few of us are just individual contributors. We're always collaborating with lots of people. So thinking about that as well and showing that you can work on a team is another big thing that I'm always looking for.
Lauren, I'm sorry I missed that question, but I think that's actually a good question to end on. I'd like to thank Jason and Janae. That was really spectacular, and I'd like to thank everybody who attended the panel today. This was really quite informative, and what a great discussion. So if we can give a silent round of applause for our panelists, that'd be. Crystal, do you want to say anything before we let everybody go?
Thanks for coming, everybody. And we'd love to have you follow us on social media. So look us up, please, Writing in Rhetoric. Thanks,
Yes.
everybody.
And I want to say a quick thank you to Crystal and Greg for organizing this. This was awesome. It was so informative. So thank you to Jason and Janae for coming. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks,
Have a good
everyone.
evening.